With opening night versus Boston less than a month away, it seems very likely that the Sixers roster as it stands will be what they run with for the majority of the season. There will be a roster crunch going on over the next few weeks that Daryl Morey has talked about openly. Daryl, please do not cut Isaiah Joe. I'm begging you, please. But I just wanted to take time to look at some lineups that I think Doc could run this year. For the first time in a long time, really ever since Embiid started playing, the Sixers have real depth, at least on paper. With the additions of PJ Tucker, Montrezl Harrell, De'Anthony Melton, Danuel House, they have different options up and down the lineup, which they just haven't really had the last few years. I'm going to be operating under the assumption that the starters will be Embiid, Harris, Tucker, Harden, Maxey. That hasn't really been confirmed anywhere, but I assume it will be over the next few weeks as media day and training camp gets started. And I'm going to be using this website called Crafted NBA because I couldn't really find any other lineup building website that wasn't for NBA 2K. And it's the only one that kind of had any visualization. Although I don't even know if I really want to shout them out because, one, they didn't have Jaden Springer anywhere in the system, even though they had Charles Bassey and Isaiah Joe, guys like that. And they also have these dollar values over their players. And Tyrese Maxey and Paul Reed were both somehow worth $3. I don't know if it's a fantasy thing, but that was pretty crazy to me. And I'm not really sure what these projected net rating per 100 stats and lineup synergy ratings even really mean because none of these lineups have played any minutes together as a 5-man unit, but I'm really just using it for the visualization. So the first lineup I'm looking at right now is this Embiid and shooters lineup. Now, you could also swap out Maxey for De'Anthony Melton if you wanted a little more defense, but I kind of trust Maxey as a shooter more than Melton at this stage, even though Melton's had a bit higher of a sample of positive shooting. And also, you kind of need Tyrese's shot creation in this lineup, considering the other three guys are all pretty much just kind of stationary catch-and-shoot guys. But really, we've always just wanted to see Embiid with as much shooting as possible, and the front office has kind of made it really difficult. But this lineup's got Niang, Tucker, Isaiah Joe. All those guys are really solid, very willing shooters from the outside. Tucker especially, just playing him in the corner. Niang and Joe you can kind of have operating more above the break or in the opposite corner. And then you just have Embiid and Maxey wrecking havoc at the basket in the mid-range. Really, you can have so many different options with this lineup, and I just really like to see it. I think it'd be really good for Maxey to have this kind of spacing and gravity from Embiid and spacing from Niang and Tucker and Isaiah Joe. I think it'd just be a real way to maximize your offense, especially in those secondary lineups without Harden in the lineup. For years, I've wanted to see the Sixers run a true small ball lineup, and they never really have outside of some short periods with Ben Simmons. He just never really looked comfortable playing the 5, but we already have plenty of evidence that PJ Tucker can play small ball 5 from his time in Houston and Milwaukee and Miami. So here you've got Harden, De'Anthony Melton, Danuel House, Tobias Harris, and PJ Tucker. This lineup has defensive versatility. Melton, House, and Tucker, and even Tobias are really versatile defenders that are willing to switch up and down the lineup. And we know that Harden prefers to switch, so it's good if you want to kind of appease Harden and utilize him to his best capability on defense. These are the kind of lineups that would best optimize that. And on offense, this lineup has good spacing, and I think as far as small ball lineups go, having Tobias as your second guy could be really valuable because Tobias is quicker than a lot of forwards and bigs that would be guarding him. And he'd still be able to, like I talked about in my last video, these are the chances Tobias would still have to be one of the lead creators in the offense. So I think he would be happy. Harden would be happy with all the spacing. Tucker and House and Melton are perfectly fine playing secondary off-ball roles. I think it'd just be a really fun lineup, especially in the playoffs as a secondary lineup where I think PJ is going to be the backup center. I think this would be a really viable group because it's not really exploitable on either end of the ball. The next lineup is the fabled all-former Houston Rockets lineup that was completed last week when they signed Montrezl Harrell. Now, I know that it's a little bit of a reach considering De'Anthony Melton never actually played for the Rockets, but he was drafted by the Rockets and he played for them in Summer League, so clearly they had some intent to bring him in, but they did wind up trading him before the season started in 2018, which was his rookie year. But this lineup actually is pretty capable on both ends of the ball. You reunite Harden with Montrezl Harrell, who he already had success with well before Montrezl was even really in his prime, and we know how lethal Harden is with one of the best rim running bigs in the NBA, and Harrell is that. Harrell is one of the most aggressive rim runners I've ever honestly watched, and you still have Tucker and Melton and House spacing the floor. That's the recipe for good, consistent offense. As long as Harden is mostly himself, that's a recipe for a really good offense. And defensively, you still have Melton, you still have Tucker, you still have House. Harden's switchable enough. In the regular season, you can manage with Harrell as your 5 on defense. I think this lineup will be used a lot by Doc. So lineup number 4, I call this the Clamps lineup. This is Embiid, Tucker, House, Matisse, and De'Anthony Melton. Although I have been vocal in the past about wanting to keep Matisse away from Embiid on the court as much as possible, I did think that this lineup could actually be feasible. Although it would be asking a lot of Embiid on offense to create offense, which, again, he's proven he can do the last couple years, so I feel more comfortable with it. This lineup on defense is just menacing, with one of the best defensive centers in the NBA, and then arguably, one of the top 5 wing defenders in the NBA alongside Melton and Tucker and House. I feel like this lineup would it'd be impossible to score. You have so much good point of attack defense. You have some switchability, a pretty switchable lineup for the most part, even though you're probably going to be running drop with Embiid. I think they generate a lot of steals and get in transition a lot, especially with Matisse and De'Anthony Melton. And even Embiid, when Embiid wants to be, his defensive IQ is so high and he's got such long arms that he can really wreak havoc in passing lanes, especially now that he's not as aggressive going for blocks just because he's a smarter defender. I think they could get out in transition a lot. And even though there's not really a point guard out there to run the offense in transition, even though Embiid has gotten a lot better at it, they'd still be getting easier looks, and it'd be really effective in my opinion. And it'd just be really fun to watch, just having that kind of athleticism in the backcourt, given how unathletic the team has been the past year. Really, ever since Simmons stopped playing, they've really been lacking that kind of punch. And with House and Thibault and Melton, I feel like it'd be a lot of fun to watch. Now, the final lineup obviously will not play that many minutes this season. There's a chance Isaiah Joe and Charles Bassey aren't even on the roster in 3 weeks, given the roster crunch. Daryl, please do not let Isaiah Joe go for nothing. I'm begging you. I don't care how small his guarantee is. Please keep him on the roster if you can. But this basically is the Sixers' young core at this point. Now, I debated putting Matisse on here because it feels like Matisse has been here forever, but the truth is he's still on his rookie contract, and he doesn't turn 26 until March. So I'd still consider him kind of that 25 and under young core. And also, I couldn't put in Jaden Springer because for some reason he wasn't in the system. And honestly, I don't really see Jaden Springer playing any kind of minutes this season. I'd be surprised if he's really even on the roster by the end of next season. It's just not really easy to see any kind of role for him. But still, this lineup, Maxey, Joe, Matisse, Paul Reed, and Bassey, it gets a little clunky with Paul Reed and Bassey in the lineup, but I think there is a world where Paul Reed can play some power forward. And in that case, it'd be a lot of fun. There'd be a lot of, defensive switchblade kind of potential with Paul Reed and Matisse on defense, and even Bassey can get a lot of rebounds, can be a lob threat. If Paul Reed can show any kind of jumper, this lineup would maybe work. Although still, it's just with Maxey and Joe in the backcourt, it's gonna get rough on defense. And Matisse, Paul Reed, Bassey, the spacing there is just really rough. But still, it'd be a lot of fun. There's a lot of athleticism, a lot of youth. The Sixers are an old team at this point. I mean, Embiid's turned 29 this year. Harden's in his 30s. PJ Tucker's almost 40. It's, they're getting old. Tobias turned 30 this year. They're a veteran team for the most part. And we know Doc doesn't like to play young guys, but if I was a coach, I would at least run this lineup out occasionally, maybe in a blowout, even though Maxey probably won't be playing in blowouts. It would just be fun to see what we have kind of coming out the pipeline. And then when I was making it, I realized, man, the Sixers really do not have that much young talent outside of Maxey. And obviously, Maxey is one of the best young players in the NBA and is an incredibly valuable asset, so he kind of makes up for it. But still, it would be nice if they had just one extra guy, preferably a wing, preferably a shooter, that we know can eventually maybe even just become the 8th or 9th man. I still believe Isaiah Joe can become that, but I mean, at this point, 2 years in, the odds aren't really in his favor. It doesn't seem like Doc really wants to play him. I would play him. I would just give him 10 games, give him 20 minutes a game in place of someone. Maybe somebody gets hurt. Just let him run. Let him have a longer leash. Just let us see what he can do, because I really do think he can make an impact. So yeah, those are the 5 lineups that I'd really like to see outside of the starting 5 for the Sixers this season. I do think Doc will be a little bit more flexible with his lineups, honestly, if just because a lot of the depth that Daryl acquired this offseason are either really old or players that Doc has coached in the past, outside of Melton. But I think Melton's good enough on his own where Doc knows that he's good and Doc is willing to play him. I mean, he's in his 5th season. So I do think we're going to be seeing different looks, and it just feels like we haven't really had that in a while, because it's kind of just been Embiid lineups and then lineups with a center who is a traditional center, kind of like Embiid, but just kind of sucks. And now we actually have real flexibility, so I think it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. So comment below if you'd like to see any other lineups. Make sure to follow me on Twitter at AndyQuinlan3. Subscribe to the channel. This is our second video. I'm really excited to keep going, and I really appreciate you watching. Thank you.